Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in today. In this video, I'm going to show you how to make an HDR image with the Canon 5D Mark IV in camera. No need for any extra software or hardware. This is a really cool feature of the Canon 5D Mark IV. It's kind of like the HDR image option on, say, an iPhone, whereby you have a little button you can tap and you take a picture and it takes a couple of different exposures, smashes them all together, and voila, you got an HDR image right there. Same thing with the 5D Mark IV. You don't need your computer, don't need any extra software. It's all done in camera. There's a few different settings and options that you can choose from. We're gonna look at what those are today, and by the time you're done watching this video, hopefully you will be able to take an HDR image in camera with the 5D Mark IV on your own. Without further ado, let's get right to it. First of all, go to the menu and make sure that you've got your selector over here set to photo rather than video mode. If you're in video mode, you won't see some of these options, HDR mode being one of them. So if you don't see the HDR mode, make sure that you're set to photo mode over here. From here, we will go to the red camera menu, page 3, all the way at the bottom, you'll see an option that says HDR mode. And right now it says disable HDR, which means HDR isn't selected. We'll tap that, and then we've got 5 options to set. The first option is to set the dynamic range and also basically turn on the HDR mode. So I'll tap this, and we've got then 4 options: auto, ±1, ±2, ±3. What this does is it tells the camera how wide of a bracket it will set for the 3 photos it's going to take, which will eventually merge into the HDR image. Auto will automatically choose how wide that bracket will be. You can set it to 1, 2, or 3, so it will be 1 exposure value, 2 or 3 outside of a normal exposure value. So if you want to adjust that manually, you can set 1, 2, or 3, or auto, letting the camera choose what that bracketing range should be. I typically set it to auto to let the camera choose what that will be in a given light environment that I'm in. The next option is the effect option. If we tap that, we'll see 4 options plus the natural. Now these art options, what they do is they basically will adjust the brightness, the saturation, the tone of the photo based on a certain preset criteria. I'm not going to go into detail on those right here, but if you want, post up a comment below and I'll be happy to answer questions you may have about that. I typically leave this in natural mode, so I'm going to select natural. Next option is the continuous HDR or one shot only. This option decides whether all these settings here are going to go away and disappear after one shot or one photo, or if it's going to stay in HDR mode indefinitely. So if you set it to one shot only, after you take one photo, it's going to revert back to non-HDR photo shooting. If you have it set to every shot, it will stay in HDR mode indefinitely until you come back to this menu and disable HDR mode. For right now, I'm going to set it to one shot only. The 4th option is the auto image align. Now here's the basic deal on this. If you're using a handheld, if you're taking a handheld photo, you want to set this to enable. If you're using a tripod, you'll want to set it to disable. What this does is if you're shooting handheld, there might be a little bit more camera shake, and it's going to auto align those images for you if you have it set to enable. When you're using a tripod, the camera assumes that there's not much camera shake, if any, going on, so it doesn't need to align anything in its computer, in the brains of the camera, so it will just overlay those images to make the HDR. So when you're shooting handheld, enable; on a tripod, disable. I'll just set it to disable for the moment, or I'm sorry, enable for the moment. And then the last option is whether or not you want to save your source images or the 3 images that are used to create the final HDR image. If you say all images, it's going to save the 3 images that it uses to create the final HDR image. If you say HDR only, it's only going to save the 4th and HDR final image. I usually like to have it set to all images because then I can go back and see what the 3 exposure, the bracketed exposure photos look like, and I might use those for various purposes. So I'll set that to all images. From here, we're all set and we can go ahead and exit the menu and exit the menu, and now we're ready to shoot. Now right in front of me here, I've just got a white wall with a painting on it. So there's really not a whole lot going on here, and the room is rather dim at this point in time in the day. So when I shoot right now, it's not gonna be an exciting photo, but in just a minute, we'll go outside and actually shoot some HDR outside, and you'll get a little bit better of a feel for this. But let me show you what this is gonna look like right here, right now. So I'm ready to shoot my HDR photo. I'm gonna compose and get everything set the way I want, and then I'm just gonna press the shutter button up here, and you'll hear the camera take 3 photos. So have a listen. So you heard it take 3 photos. You see the red light is on here. It means it's thinking, it's processing. In just a second, this will disappear and we'll see our resulting HDR image. So if we press the play button here, that's what our final HDR image looks like. Now if we use the scroll wheel and scroll back, that was the overexposed or kind of high exposure value. There's the low exposure value, and there's the kind of middle value one. So it's those 3 photos, the middle, the low, and the high, that the camera combines to make the HDR image here. So you can see this is not a very exciting image here. Let's go outside and see some real photos in real life. All right, here we are inside of Lightroom to compare what our HDR source images look like compared to the final image. So I've got 4 images down here in the preview part of the window, and up here we've got 2 images side by side to compare. The image on the left is our final HDR image, and the image currently on the right is the standard exposed image. So you can see the standard image, it's a little bit dark up in the corners here, and the sun is a little bit overblown. But when you compare it to what our final image looks like, we get a little bit more blue from the sky compared to the standard exposure. That darkness in the corners and kind of on the side of the house here comes back into play. So you can see the standard versus the finished HDR image here. If we look at the other 2 images, because remember each of these HDR photos has 3 images. It's got the standard exposure, the under, and then the overexposed. Here's what the underexposed looks like. And the overexposed combined with the standard gives us the HDR. Now you can see on the right side of the screen that there's a little bit of a size difference, or you see it looks like it kind of zooms in over here. And that's because we had this set to align images. So it had to do in camera a little bit of aligning of those images, because each of these shots here were all handheld. Each of them is just slightly, ever so slightly misaligned, if you will. And so it has to do the aligning, and it has to kind of crop them a little bit. So that's image number 1 right there. And here's image number 2. Again, on the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see that reference image. This is what our final image looks like with the HDR image all smashed together. And on the right-hand side, this is our standard exposure. So you can see the brick over here is a little bit darker than it is on our final image. The tree, the orange and yellow of the leaves are just a little bit less vibrant, if you will, than the leaves over here. Same thing with the sky. We get just a smidge more blue there than we have in our standard exposed image there. So as we said before, there's 3 images going in to make this final image over here. So we've got our standard on the right hand side. Now let's look at our underexposed. Obviously much more dark around the edges, and the leaves are kind of a slightly different color there. And our overexposed, this is where we're going to get in our final image, in our HDR image, the details for this dark stuff over here. So obviously the tree is overblown here, but over here in the corner, kind of the darker areas, this is where the detail is going to come out in our final image there. And when we do the final smash together, if you will, you'll see that there's a slight change, and it kind of zooms in a little bit. Again, that's because in camera it had to align those images slightly, because I shot this image handheld, so there was just a little bit of aligning needed between the 3 different exposures. So there you have it. Boom! Canon 5D Mark IV HDR magic. Hope you liked the video and you found it useful. If you did, give me a thumbs up. If you want to see more of my videos, you can subscribe down below. And if you've got questions, you know where to post them. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you in the next video.